Okay, I'm live, I think. I'm continuing reading from Pete Walker's book, chapter 8 of the Tao of Fully feeling. I'm going to show it to you. I've had a few nights of reading this, and it's really useful for people who have C-PTSD. A lot of people basically start off by realizing that they might go to their doctors or they have anxiety and such like, and what happens is that people are trying to figure out why they're having anxiety, why their lives are falling to bits, and a lot of it can relate back to childhood pain that's not been resolved and denial, which stops the healing process from occurring. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a bit of psychoeducation out there in the world, because there are many people that have not got the resources. There's quite a lot of books out there that are helpful, a couple that I'm reading, but also there are groups on Facebook that are specific for C-PTSD, which I know, if you want to email me or go over to my Facebook page, you're able to do that. All of the links are going to be below. If you know anybody who's got C-PTSD, it's worth, or anxiety, it's worth maybe letting them see this video, because the book I'm going to read from starts off that we've got to basically get rid of the denial of that our childhoods were painful, because a lot of people have had a lot of hardship in childhood, and they'll say, well, it wasn't that bad. I wasn't hit as bad as, my friend so-and-so, or, we're blocking out. And particularly with sexual abuse and violence, it's very difficult for people that have been through that as children to have adult lives that are happy and fulfilling. So I'm going to read a bit of a book, and it can be on the playback as well. But I would say that if you've got C-PTSD, it's going to be psychoeducation that's going to help you, because if you don't understand what flashbacks are or what's going on, then you're in a position that you're not going to really be able to heal. I know myself, going to therapy for complex PTSD, that in itself wouldn't be enough. It's just one of the tools of many. And there are many things that we can do. And this book I'm going to explain as I read, and you can go back over my last 2 videos. So we've got an issue that the social expectancy is that because people who've been through childhood trauma don't look wounded on the outside, and a lot of us, I know, have very, lives where we're very quite successful in life. And what happens for many, they get to a particular age and then things begin to fall to bits because the initial woundings have not been addressed. So the younger you are out there, I really would say to you, if you've had early childhood trauma or abuse, if you start looking at it now, when you hit, like, I'm 50 now, but when you get to my age, you won't be suffering. And for those that are older, they'll know what I'm talking about. It's stuff that a lot of people will bypass through spirituality or, partying, alcohol, food. There's all sorts of ways of dumbing it down so that we don't feel that pain, or get into codependent relationships and stuff like that. And the social expectancy is that whatever your parents have done to you, or your carers, because it's your family, that you basically just forgive them. And this is not realistic with C-PTSD. I'd say for myself, I've had a bit of a triggering day today, a silly example, but I've come from child abuse. And today I went in to fill a visa online for traveling to America. And I was asked the question, my parents' names, and that was really triggering for me, and it put me out of it was uncomfortable for me for a couple of hours. But thankfully I was able to, it put me into a bit of a flashback and fight flight, and I was able to speak to a friend or a couple of friends and just say, I'm really wound up by being asked that what the name of my parents, when I don't want to remember that right now. So I'm going to get my glasses and I'm going to read. And if you've got any questions, then you can just, pop on and say hello if you want. So today I'm reading, it's about in childhood, sarcasm, teasing disguised as abuse. And I'm sure many of us have had that. And this is Pete Walker, the Tao of Fully feeling. So he says, sarcasm and teasing are among the most widespread forms of verbal and emotional abuse in our society today. Many of us routinely and unconsciously use destructive sarcasm, usually under the cover of innocent fun, to dump anger and shame on each other. Sarcasm can be used to do this through blatant insults and put-downs, or through the more subtle form of teasing. This is not to say that sarcasm and teasing are all or none issues. Most people can enjoy mild, non-toxic forms of teasing. Non-charged and non-destructive sarcasm can be truly funny. When an individual has recovered access to all of his emotions, he can often use humor to release discomfort or hurt in a healthy way. The laughter that accompanies non-abusive teasing can sometimes discharge pain in a way that cannot be matched by crying or angering. Laughter, however, is dysfunctional when it is used to mask rather than release sadness or anger. For just as crying cannot replace the function of angering in grieving, laughter cannot replace the function of either crying or angering. Unfortunately, emotional expressiveness has become so distorted in our culture that we often laugh when we really need to cry, and commonly use sarcastic humor to express anger rather than be directly assertive. So as an example, if we're feeling sad, a lot of us will deny that, and and because we were denied our emotional feelings as children, we grow up into adults who basically are denying our feelings. And it's important we begin to be able to pinpoint what we're feeling, and if somebody asks us how we are, to be able to tell the truth of what we're feeling. And as children, through childhood trauma, violence, sexual abuse, or stuff like that, having to do things that adults wanted us to do, it means that we cut off and we don't feel what we feel. And then, for instance, if we get into relationships that are, slightly abusive, we will accept things that are unacceptable. So it's really important we check in with our gut. Is that okay or is that not okay? If somebody's saying something that's unkind, are we okay with that or not? And to be able to say in an adult way, I don't like being spoken to like that, or, I don't find that very funny, that hurt me. And that's part of our healing process. It's reparenting ourselves so that we can have compassion for ourselves and that we get to stand up for ourselves. So I'm going to continue reading. He says, when we express our sadness and anger and hurt, we can also release some of it through humor. Joking and laughing about life's pains and losses is normal, healthy, and often wonderful. Fully feeling people enjoy a rich, fluid balance of crying, angering, and laughing in the release of pain and hurt. Most survivors can benefit from gentle teasing about their life difficulties if they are also welcomed to be mad and sad about them. So, for instance, sometimes if I'm going through a flashback, what I'll do is, and I spoke to a friend earlier, sometimes I'm apologetic that I'm upset, and we don't need to be apologetic. When people love us and we're having a bad moment, we don't need to apologize for expressing what we really feel. Like, to say to somebody, I feel really sad, and then, to apologize, say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm being this way. We are what we are, and the people that really love us will stick with us. And not everybody gets people who have trauma or who have complex PTSD, because people that have not been through abuse won't get it. And those are the people that generally, probably well-meaning, will say, why aren't you over that yet? It's in the past. And why don't you forgive your parents? Or why don't you forgive your uncle who, sexually abused you for years, or whatever. And those things are highly inappropriate. So if you've not been through abuse and you're watching this, be mindful that half the population on planet Earth, 1 in 3 girls, have been through sexual abuse and violence or violations, and 1 in 5 boys. And we've seen that with the Catholic Church lately, all of that calling out that went on. There are huge numbers of people that need healing, and we need to start balancing it out in society. By number 1, being allowed to speak up and not being put into toxic shame, or being guilted because we haven't done what society thinks is the correct thing to do. So I'm going to continue. He says, characteristics of destructive sarcasm. He says here, denial is rampant about the destructiveness of sarcasm in this culture. Much of the teasing and sarcasm that takes place in the average family and wider society is little more than camouflaged abuse. In the guise of humor, many of us say horribly insulting things to each other. We commonly wound each other with sarcasm, even when we are honestly and innocently intending only to be funny. Sarcasm is abusive, however, whether it is blatantly or unconsciously insulting. Distinguishing healthy teasing from damaging sarcasm is sometimes difficult. The key characteristics of destructive sarcasm is that it is belittling and damaging to another's self-esteem. And let's face it, we all know when we do it. We know when we're pushing the line with somebody else, and we know when we're pushing the line with ourselves. And sometimes we do say horrible things to each other, and we've, got to take an adult approach and think, would I like that said to me, for instance? An important bottom line here is that sarcasm is destructive when the teased individual feels hurt and does not feel tickled in any way. I'm continuing reading this book. So he says, unfortunately, some of us are so emotionally deadened that we don't recognize sarcastic attacks. Sometimes we even fail to notice how contracted and wary we become around those who habitually prick up this with sarcasm. Because of this, we must learn to identify other characteristics of destructive sarcasm and teasing. Hurtful sarcasm is often delivered in an aggressive, humiliating, or condescending tone of voice. Such intonation typically affects us in noticeable ways. We often instinctively contract and shrink in response to the noxiousness of teasing attention, and we often hold our breath or squirm or flush in embarrassment and feel the urge to run away or disappear. I would say that the more I've come out of myself and blossomed, I really do now stand up for myself. So part of the healing complex PTSD is where you begin to get to a point where you put your shoulders back. It happens naturally. The more we get rid of the inner critic that tells us that we're crap, or we're stupid, or we're not enough, or we're not good enough, or we're not qualified enough. When we get rid of all of that, we begin to own who we are, and we step into the journey of our soul, and we stand up and we protect ourselves, and we have the right to do that. For instance, parents who might say, who do you think you are? And, you'll never amount to anything. Hearing those things are very, very damaging. Continuing reading, he says, we often hold our breath, squirm or flush in embarrassment, and feel the urge to run away or disappear. It feels awful to be on the receiving end of abusive sarcasm. Imagine being the target of a nasty comedian. I don't know this comedian, but he says Don Rickles, or someone who has actually hurtfully teased you. How do you feel inside as you picture them picking on you in front of other people? I mean, this happens in workplaces as well, and it happens in all sorts of places, but we have the right to stand up for ourselves. So he says, destructive sarcasm is also characterized by its subject matter. It often aims at mocking attention of our vulnerabilities, idiosyncrasies and misfortunes. Almost all of us have been teased unmercifully about our own most tender vulnerabilities. Because of this, many of us are reluctant to share our sore spots with anyone but our most trusted friends. Some of us have been so betrayed by malicious teasing that we don't share our insecurities with anyone at all. And I'd also say that complex PTSD, being bullied at school does it as well. So there are many ways that we get to having complex PTSD. He says, some of us have been so betrayed by malicious teasing that we don't share our insecurities with anyone at all. Instead, we accumulate large burdens of minor fears and humiliations and failings that we could easily discard if we could talk about them without being ridiculed. No wonder feelings of loneliness and disconnection are so prevalent in our culture. I am frequently struck with sadness as I witness various clients in discomfort as they squeeze out confessions of their own imperfections. Perhaps 95% of the deepest, darkest secrets my clients struggle with or to reveal are the relatively innocent taboo thoughts, feelings and behaviors, all of all healthy human beings. Great burdens of shame and fear occur around such harmless, universal experience of revenge fantasies, death fears, angry preservations, sexual reveries, and grandiose flights of fancy. And I will say that it's important that I read this chapter. And if you go back over the last 2 videos I've done, because it will all make sense. If you've just come on tonight, then you may not know what I'm really referring to. But this is about complex PTSD and childhood trauma and how we begin to recover and get rid out of flashbacks and fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode and start becoming whole and, you know, embracing who we truly are and having a good life. He says here also that any guilt about minor and relatively harmless mistakes or lapses into unfairness is almost always grossly out of proportion to their actual severity. This is yet another horrible consequence of being deprived in childhood of a safe place to normalize our foibles through empathic sharing. In our culture, our uniqueness is often subjected to sarcasm in such a way that we often feel too afraid or too ashamed to unfold into full intimacy of our individuality. So, to avoid teasing, many of us avoid expressing ourselves in ways that make us stand out or excel. So I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to really, you know, I started making videos, but somebody put me down about something and I was very sensitive. And I stayed away from making YouTubes for a while because I felt really, and it was a friend that picked on part of my body and it made me feel inferior. And you know, we need to watch people who pick on us and we need to be able to stand up for ourselves because we're all in the same boat. We've all been born and we're all going to die and we're all unique and we've all got our own beautiful things about us. So if you have somebody in your life that's putting you down, whether you're in a codependent relationship that's making you feel, you know, awful, begin to look at it. And the books that I'm suggesting are going to be below, and also 14 steps for the getting rid of the inner critic, and then 13 steps for managing flashbacks, which is really important to know if you're going to be working on healing C-PTSD. And a lot of people think it's anxiety and they have panic attacks and they don't understand that, you know, they don't put 2 and 2 together. So it's important to begin to objectify your life and, you know, begin to become who we truly are. We're here for a short period of time on planet Earth. I can tell you, my time between the age of 30 to 50, which I am now, it's flown by. So the sooner we get on with reading the right books and getting the right information, the better the rest of our lives is going to be. He says here, in our culture, our uniqueness is often subjected to sarcasm in such a way that we often feel too afraid, too ashamed to unfold into full intimacy of our individuality. To avoid teasing, many of us avoid expressing ourselves in ways that make us stand out or excel. I've repeated that, but it's worth repeating. We are afraid to be more than anyone else in most areas of our lives. We embrace mediocrity and the sterility of conformity and silence ourselves or withdraw when we can't come up with the ordinary and expected response to a given situation. Our authenticity withers and dies and is replaced by a soulless rhetoric of trivia and cliches, and all that has been proven to be safe and socially acceptable. For women, this is the curse of pinkness and lace. For men, this is the banishment into the dessert box of scores and statistics, the impoverished monoculture of sports conversation. Sarcasm has ravaged conversation so severely in our culture that culture is almost a misnomer for a society which displays such pervasive poverty in its expressiveness. The emptiness of the cocktail patter and characteristics most of our social gatherings stems directly from the fact that there is so little that is safe to talk about. I mean, if you think about it, where we go, there's, you know, people don't really talk about anything. It's like, you know, what was on TV last night, who posted what on Facebook or whatever. There's no real depth of conversation and digging deep into our true feelings. It's all superficial. And, you know, quite frankly, when I stopped drinking, I got out of superficiality. I stopped drinking alcohol in 2012. And that's when my complex PTSD really came to the surface, and I had to start dealing with it because I was no longer using a crutch. And I began to have nightmares and flashbacks, and I needed help. You know, I really needed help, and there was no help out there. And right away, and when I began to tell people what I was feeling or going through, they were going on about the law of attraction and forgiveness and letting go, and it was completely useless to me. In fact, I followed that path for a while, and it pushed me further into a hole, to the point where I had a breakdown, and there were many losses in my life. And we need people to speak to, you know, whether it's a friend, a therapist, or social media, Facebook groups that deal with C-PTSD and anxiety. I have a female group, actually, for any females out there. I have a female complex PTSD anxiety group. So, continuing. Sarcasm has become so socially acceptable that noted individuals are sometimes honoured in sickening orgies of sarcasm called roasts. If beings from another planet witnessed one of those roasts, they would probably think that the honoree was being punished for a terrible crime. How awful that the pillars of our society model to us that insults disguised as jokes are not only acceptable, but also worthy of smiling appreciation. It is also widely considered fair game. In our society, to aim sarcasm at people's distinguishing physical characteristics, and I don't know how many people have had that done to them out there, you know, but having our physical characteristics picked on, it's a very cruel thing to do to another human being. And often, if we've had that as children, you know, we really go inward, and we, you know, if terrible things were said to us, we hold that in our entire life, and we can run our entire adult life on something that was, you know, awful that was said to us as children. We've also got here things like, you know, you'll never amount to much, but then, you know, the physical stuff, being told, you know, there's something wrong with you physically is a cruel thing for an adult to do to a child. He goes on to say, I was so frequently teased about being freckled in childhood that I came to hate my skin. Many people with red hair come to feel the same kind of shame because of the relentless childhood teasing. And what rare person has not been teased into disliking his or her body? Who has not been tumbled into self-hatred because of teasing comparisons of someone taller or shorter, thinner or heavier, darker or fairer? How many men fail to enjoy sex because they don't have a penis the size of a stallion? How many women suffer similar because they do not weigh 10 or 20 pounds less than what is actually healthy for them? Sarcasm also causes many of us to lose our ability to talk about our successes, as well as our failures and losses. Accomplishments and healthy pride in one's achievements are often degraded in the family. You know, like if you're successful in something, people say, you know, oh, you don't get ahead of yourself and stuff like that. People can be really, you know, what this is life. You know, we've got one shot on this planet, like here and now. So when we do great things and we're successful, we should be able to celebrate those. You know, there's a healthy pride. Ambitions and aspirations are commonly ridiculed as if they were preposterous. Many of us had our healthy self-validation violated with sardonic criticisms like, don't make me laugh, listen, Mr. Know-it-all, you and what army? You'll be lucky to get a job as a ditch digger. Who are you kidding? The only thing you'll ever earn is an award for being lazy and a good for nothing. In this same vein, I sometimes wonder how many males are mocked out of natural leaning towards the arts and helping professions, and how many females are taunted out of their natural leadership and athletic abilities. Finally, destructive sarcasm reinforces perfectionism. We are so terrified of the teasing that will greet our mistakes, that we take few, if any, risks in our lives. Hence, many of us give up trying to learn new things and completely lose our wonderful sense of curiosity, adventure in very early life. So I'm gonna continue with this chapter tomorrow. I think the important thing is to probably go back to the last 2 videos and look, if you have anxiety or PTSD, or if you don't know what it is, complex PTSD is a more severe form of PTSD. So PTSD is a one-off event. I'm not saying it's one-off, but I'm going to give you an example. Somebody at war, you know, they have the most tragic experience, and that one event can, or like a car accident, PTSD, it can completely take over somebody's life. So complex PTSD, it's years and years and years of the same thing that we've battled with as children generally. And then we end up as adults suffering with nightmares, flashbacks, fight, flight, freeze, social anxiety, not being able to, operate in the world the way we want to. So I don't know who's there and watch this, but hopefully it's been useful to somebody out there. I'm going to sign off, and I'm going to be making an astrology video in a minute, because I study evolutionary astrology. So I'm going back to look at some astrology and make us an astrology video, because I found astrology really useful in my own healing. And the other thing I like to do is put psychoeducation out there for people that really do need to understand what C-PTSD is. I thank you for watching. I'm going to sign off, and check out the links below. And if you've got any questions, and some people I know are shy because of the nature of what I talk about on these videos, they don't want to comment live. So you can always send me an email. My email address is below, or drop me a line on Facebook. Thanks for watching. Thank you.